Teaching music for a four-stringed instrument, that's what we're going to be studying here a bit, but it's teaching music in general. If you wanted to learn to repair a car, you would learn how to repair cars. You repair many different kinds of types. Well, that's what music is too. It's an overall coverage of learning. And music is a language. And you should learn it as a language. It's no more difficult than any other language to learn. And people who play by ear just do it like a young child would. They just absorb it as it goes. And that's a very good way to do it. But then they don't really know how to tell or say what they're doing or really necessarily go unless they're in their genre, in the type of music they want to play, in their dialect. In other words, music, like a language, has different dialects. It has a dialect of classical music. That's what Rob McKillop plays on the banjos. It has a dialect of Irish, which is a lot of what other people play, which is a fairly new advent to the tenor banjo, and in reality it's more related to mandolin than it is the tenor banjo, because it's mandolin tuning an octave below, and it's related to the fiddle because what you're really doing, you don't play chords that often, most of the players don't. What you're really doing is playing the fiddle parts on a mandolin tuned instrument an octave lower. And the mandolin tune's the same as the fiddle, the violin. So what you're really doing is transposing those fiddle parts to a four-string banjo. Now they call that Irish music now. It's fairly new compared to all others, since the tenor banjo came in somewhere in the teens or thereabouts, back in maybe around 1910 or 11 or something like that. And it came in as a doubling instrument, a second instrument to play for the tango orchestras around New York City. The violin players and the viola players would play these forms of this kind of a banjo, a four-string banjo, and so therefore it ended up being, the lead banjo ended up being tuned like a violin, a little small tenor type banjo, and they called them tango banjos, and this instrument became the viola in the violin section, tuned exactly the same as the viola, which is an octave above a cello. Now, that's the history of these instruments. Now, the plectrum came off of the 5-string by dropping the 5th string and playing the C tuning of the plectrum. Some plectrum players today, very few here and there, go ahead and play the G-type tuning of the 5-string on 4 strings. Sean Moses being one of the main ones. Now, that being said about the instruments themselves, the 6-string banjo is a wonderful instrument too. Johnny St. Cyr was one of the original jazz players on the 6-string banjo. So it has a good reason to be a jazz banjo. It's not played like guitar players play today because it is a very acoustic instrument. Now, if you electrify it, it doesn't have the same qualities as the banjo does itself. So therefore, today's guitar players play a lot because of electronics. You should never play a 6-string banjo that way unless you're just playing chords or something. If you want to play like Johnny St. Cyr, you've got to really play the instrument. But enough of that. Now, back to music. Music applies to all these instruments. It applies to everything. Music has to do with scales. So later we'll learn what the reason for scales is and why. You don't need to deal with pentatonic scales and oriental scales and blues scales because those come in a different dialect of music. You learn to speak music, then you learn the dialect that you want to do it in, the genre that you want to play it in. I call it a dialect. Jazz has a certain dialect, a lot of more modern type chords today. It didn't have when jazz began. Now, every one of them has their own dialect, the classical type music or whatever. Now, we're just in general going to learn music to start with. And a good place to start on the 4-string banjo is with what they call a lead sheet. And the lead sheet has come about by having a melody line written. You should learn the notes of a melody on the scale, on the staff of the music, because that will give you what the melodies of the song is. It's an easy way to learn the proper melodies. You can learn them by ear, you can learn by rote from other people or whatever, but the best way to do it is learn it yourself and know where the notes are on the fingerboard, all the notes on the fingerboard, everywhere. Every note that you touch on the fingerboard, you should know the name of that note and where it belongs in scale use or whatever. Now that's what you need to do. And also then you need to learn harmonies. And harmonies are made up of adding together various notes, and that sound that comes out is a harmony that comes out. Now, on the lead sheet, all we're interested in is the very simple structure of whether it's a major, minor, or a 7 chord. A major, minor, or 7 chord, an augmented chord, or a diminished chord. Those are a little less, but we'll get around to those as they go. Major, minor, and 7th chord is what we're dealing with here mostly at the beginning. Now, the chords are made up of notes of a scale. And let's take C, for example. C scale is C, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then the C repeats, and they call that an octave higher. The C repeats an octave higher. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes, and the 8th note becomes the octave in a scale, whether it's major or minor. Now that's not chromatic. The word chromatic scale means every note on there, including the whites and the blacks on the piano. So you'd be C, C sharp, D, D sharp. Now, the thing is, if you're coming down the scale, when you've got E, you would go E flat. So E flat and D sharp are what they call enharmonic. They're the same note, basically. A violin player will play them a little differently because they don't have frets. But you got E, E flat, D, D flat to C, whereas you have C, D sharp, E, wouldn't have E sharp, you'd have F. C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, and then F. Between E and F on the scale you learn there is no half step in between. E sharp is F natural. F flat is E natural, but that's complicated. We'll learn that as we go along. All you really need to learn when you begin basic music, what we're discussing here, is what a lead sheet is, and then you would learn the melody from the lead sheet so you could be able to play the melody from the lead sheet. Then we'll look at the chord symbol above and we'll add in the harmonies of the C chord that is, and we'll learn what the harmonies of the C chord is. And then by learning this way, you learn to be creative, and it expresses you and you can learn what you want to learn. Anybody who is a good teacher only teaches people to want to be creative. They teach inspiration. What we're trying to get here is inspiration. We want you to be inspired to take what we tell you and run with it. Go on from there. So we're starting with a lead sheet. I'll end this now. This is part 1. We'll go on to part 2 or whatever because I don't want to make them too long. End of part 1.